Thank you very much to all who participated in this panel. We'll continue now with the last forum of this morning. Panel is forum number 7, part 1, future challenges on product safety, changes in the consumer's behavior and markets needed attention, green, digital transition and their relation to the product safety. Please come on stage, the participant of this panel. The moderator will be Carlos Salazar, head of the Study and Intelligence of SERNAC. He's an economist and master's degree from the University of Chile, as well as philosophy. He's a candidate for a doctorate. He's the head at the SERNAC. He leads the research investigation strategies with a focus on intelligence and market surveillance, product safety and sustainability in the consumption by generating studies and products on information towards the consumer. Carlos, please.
Hola, ¿qué tal? ¿Cómo están?
Hello, how are you?
Primero, es un gusto tenerlos acá.
First, I'm glad to have you here as a head of the Intelligence Studies Department. I have been a host, and so we are honored for your attendance, not only in person, but also virtually. We are very happy to have you here. I just want to thank mainly the team of the Intelligence Study Department, the professionals on the Safety and Sustainability Unit on Consumption, and the ones on Market Intelligence who have contributed a lot. They have been here earlier and earlier and leaving later and later to be contributors to this effort. Each one of you, starting with your management, Esteban and Daniela, thank you. Thanks very much for this. For today's panel, we'll have a first presentation given by Mr. Leonardo Lepiscopo, who is the National Director of Consumer Defense and Consumption Arbitrage in Argentina. But due to agenda problems, there was a contingency, we had to cancel. He sends his regards, and he will send a presentation, a recorded one, so it can be on the website and you can see it later. The topic he was going to refer was the mission or to obligation to inform. The work was around the Mercosur work done, and this is what important to access that knowledge. We'll be waiting eagerly for that presentation. In its replacement as a substitute to tell us about this interpretation SERNAC has regarding the influence that was being done in Chile. With us we have Javiera Torres Rivera. She's an attorney at the Diego Portales University, candidate to regulatory framework at the Pontifical Catholic University, a consultant of the SERNAC. We thank her because she's part of it in such a short notice. Big round of applause for her. Good afternoon, everyone. Well, this is kind of improvised, so I'll tell you some things from my experience at the Interpretation Department of SERNAC. In this matter specifically, which are influences, it has been of great interest in that matter, so we'll tell you a little what we've done to face this phenomenon. And first was identify it. We noticed there was an amount of influencers generating a business or an influence, as the name mentions, and in many times it can risk consumers' health, precisely because they aim to an audience that in many opportunities may be hyper-vulnerable. Children, adolescents, in many opportunities senior people, which is not the target audience, but there's some content targeted to that audience, women that might be considered hyper-vulnerable, as well as men that in certain markets might also be hyper-vulnerable. So we identified the problem and we saw how to face it, since it was a recent phenomenon. The SERNAC has the entitlement, interpretative entitlement. We can interpret the law and issue documents, and they generate an effect in trade and industry in general. So we first interpret what advertising is. To see whether the advertising phenomenon according to Chilean law, we could understand that there was a regulation regarding consumers. So first, we interpreted the advertising phenomenon in a broad way, understanding their basic requirements, which is first informing, that would be their goal, but also persuade. That's to make the difference between information. And we can determine that influencers might be within this concept due to its amplitude. Advertising does not depend necessarily of mass media, as we understood advertising in magazine, newspapers, TV, but it varies in its way and depth, and also the individuals being part of it. We understood that influencers were within this concept of advertising, probably not the influencer themselves, but their activity, and that allows us to interpret that the consumer laws can be applied to them. So we do not require an amendment, a regulation amendment. In many opportunities they just said, okay, how are you regulating influences? In our country we haven't been able to move on there, and we explained to them that it hasn't been part of a regulation modification, but using the interpretation bias and understanding that it can be applied to influencers.
We've also established what are the common elements in influencers to identify them, because many times we can think that any person that uses social media is an influencer. But there are certain aspects in common that we can identify in them, and we can determine if the consumer law is applicable to them. The first of them is having a certain degree of credibility and influence on a certain audience, and that they do it through social media. This isn't also defined in a closed manner, because the definition keeps varying, the mechanisms keep varying. So as long as it's social media or digital mediums as a base requisite, they are the kind of people that can achieve certain influence on a certain audience. Here, the amount of followers is not that relevant. Of course, it's part of the influence, but it's not necessary to be Lionel Messi or be the influencers with the largest amount of followers. Sometimes you have a niche and you generate influence in different aspects, and we think that is enough to see if consumer law is applicable to them. And with that, managing a shift in behavior in consumption habits and interpreting that through this circular, we've established some best practices guidelines for influencers, because it's important when it comes to security and safety. And it's that influencers are responsible when it comes to the information they provide their consumers. Not just because they receive compensation, they will be promoting anything. They have certain professional duties and certain safeguards that they need to take into account when they share information with the public, and the effect that that information will have. So that's what I can tell you so far of how in SERNAC we've been tackling this issue. I don't know if you have any questions on the matter. Just thinking about the future challenges, how we can trace this, what's the trajectory we'll follow. Here in studies, what we developed on this subject, that we put on the gloves and pick this information up. If there's any sort of discovery or any line of research that you may raise, we can follow up on that. So what do you think is the next challenge that maybe as an investigation center should we take into consideration? That is really hard to determine, because as I mentioned at the start, this is a field that is pretty dynamic, and we don't know where it's going to go. In this moment in particular, right now, that they mentioned it previously, the miraculous products, which is something that we're very focused on right now, but we don't know if tomorrow we're going to have different products. There's different challenges in social media. For example, the cinnamon challenge, where people ate a spoonful of cinnamon, and that was part of the challenge that people undertook, and it varies. We do not know what is the next big phenomenon that people are going to follow. So I think that the challenge is to be always on the lookout on any sort of variance in the market, any sort of variation in the advertising industry, this one in particular, and seeing as we identify them, how are we going to be facing the issues that come up. And sometimes it's not always necessary to modify the law. Sometimes we can do this through interpretation of the law, through auditing, and through the different tools that each agency has among their repertoire. Thank you. Let's give a round of applause to Javiera. With very little time to prepare herself, she gave us a really detailed brushstroke of what is going on in the National Consumer Service. Now, if you'll allow me and give me 1 second, I am going to switch languages because the next presentation is in English. Entonces, la próxima presentación
given by Ms. Brigitte Acoca, Head of Consumer Policy Unit, OECD. The presentation will be on consumer product safety in the digital and green transitions. She's going to focus on recent and forthcoming OECD activities. Ms. Acoca joined the OECD Directorate for Science, Technology, and Innovation in 2005. As head of the Consumer Policy Unit, she's responsible for the activities of the OECD Committee on Consumer Policy and its Working Party on Consumer Product Safety, focusing on empowering and protecting consumers in the digital and green transitions. She holds a legal master's degree in European Institutional and Competition Law from the College of Europe in Bruges, Belgium, and a postgraduate degree in the EU and private international law from University Paris Second Pantheon Assas in France. So, Brigitte, if you can hear us, the floor is all yours.
Good afternoon. I hope you can hear me well.
We can hear you perfect.
I'm sorry, there is a delay in the translation, so it might be a little bit complicated. But I'll start now. Well, thank you for the invitation. We're very pleased to be here. I just wanted to, first of all, provide you with a few first words on who we are, the Committee on Consumer Policy, which activities I support as the head of the Consumer Policy Unit at the OECD. This committee is one of the oldest OECD committees that unites consumer policy makers to share best practices, set standards, and conduct research. It is supported by the Working Party on Consumer Product Safety, with which over the past decade, it has collaborated on several projects on e-commerce and digital technology, including artificial intelligence and sustainable consumption. To support the committee and the Working Party's research, we are developing policy analysis and empirical work, and this work will now be examined by a new global forum on consumer policy that has been created very recently and announced at the OECD Consumer Policy Ministerial in October. Over the years, we have partnered with international organizations such as the Association for Southeast Asian Nations, the ASEAN, the United Nations Trade and Development, UNCTAD, and the International Consumer Protection and Enforcement Network, as well as the FIAC, on issues spanning e-commerce product safety and sustainable consumption. Our priorities are well aligned. We have been looking into how emerging online business practices can harm consumers. We're tackling how to keep unsafe products away from consumers, addressing unsafe products available for sale online, and I'll get back to that later in my presentation. New product safety concerns from digital technologies incorporated in products, and the safe design of products that are considered sustainable, greener products, to make sure that when products are recycled, refurbished, or repaired, they do not raise product safety issues. This work is very much linked to our other priority on protecting consumers in the green transition, which focuses on the right to repair, planned obsolescence, how business models, including, for example, online marketplaces that enable second-hand markets or rental of products, how these can help consumers make greener choices. And we seek to look into how to enhance the effectiveness of consumer policy and to actually measure its impact. We have been doing a lot of work on improving methodologies in this regard, and also taking into account behavioral insights and also the results from our work on consumer vulnerability and new work that we have started on gender and how these gender issues apply to consumer policy. We actually collaborate with a number of other OECD committees, including the Competition Committee, the Environmental Policy Committee, and of course, the Digital Policy Committee. Next slide, please. All these projects were presented and discussed at the first ever OECD ministerial meeting on consumer policy that was held on the 8th and the 9th of October at the OECD in Paris. This was the first ever ministerial in more than 50 years of existence of the committee, but it was a very successful one. The event brought together ministers and high-level representatives from 45 countries and 67 delegations, alongside civil society, consumer organizations, other experts, businesses, and other international organizations. The participants and their portfolios reflected the breadth and diversity of the consumer policy community, as I said, represented by a number of ministers and deputy ministers from economy, finances, trade, environment, health, justice, consumer protection, and social rights. And it was interesting to see the degree to which some of them were actually covering product safety or not. Next slide, please. This meeting offered an unprecedented opportunity to hold a global conversation at the highest political level on the most pressing consumer policy issues today. And we had the opportunity to hear voices from different corners of the world, including representation from Africa, through the Common Market for Eastern and Southern Africa, COMESA, UNCTAD, the World Bank, the Organization of American States, UNEP, as well as Consumers International, and other non-member countries such as India, Kenya, and China. This wide range of perspectives underscored the importance of collaborative efforts in addressing today's complex consumer challenges. Next slide, please. The meeting revolved around 5 intertwined themes addressed in sessions focusing on the digital and green transitions, tackling product safety risks, enhancing international cooperation, promoting inclusivity, and economic development through consumer policy. A ministerial declaration to which 47 OECD members and partner economies adhered at the meeting was adopted, setting out a range of commitments and calls. There were insightful discussions on the central role of consumers in the global economy and the need for action to address risks exposing consumers to new vulnerabilities and harms in the two transitions. And these include large volumes of unsafe products that are available online and new challenges associated with digital tech, as I mentioned. There was a lot of interest from a range of stakeholders in addressing product safety issues so that emerging economies and developing economies can also benefit from the conversation, and that this discussion can really be elevated at global level. Next slide, please. As regards our specific work on consumer product safety, more and more consumers shop online. This is often convenient for consumers, but also poses specific challenges for product safety. Building on an OECD online sweep, which is an investigation coordinated by the OECD among a number of countries, 21 OECD countries and non-member economies gathering at the same time and investigating the same type of websites and product categories, we conducted such a sweep in 2015, and already at that time we saw that there were large volumes of unsafe products, many of them being banned or recalled, and yet available for sale and in the hands of consumers. We wanted to compare the results from this 2015 sweep with the situation a few years later. And so in 2021, we conducted another sweep, and what we have seen was quite worrying. We have inspected more than 4,000 products ranging from toys to electrical household appliances, and the findings suggested that an overall rate of non-compliance of 79% of the products inspected. We also found that almost 9 in 10, that is 87% of banned or recalled products were actually available for sale online. These were often available from online marketplaces or suppliers in other countries. The report that summarized the results from the 2021 sweep concluded that more needs to be done by retailers and marketplaces to comply with local laws and improve their standards, including by signing up to voluntary commitments, we call them pledges, to go beyond the legal obligations in their jurisdictions and partner with authorities to quickly detect unsafe products for sale on their websites and remove them from their listings. Because what we have seen is that even where those marketplaces were able to identify unsafe products on their platform and were removing them, the same unsafe products could reappear, sometimes just 2 weeks later, on the same platforms. Following the sweep, the Working Party also released a communiqué to support the development of consistent product safety pledges in countries and released policy guidance on the key commitments such pledges should contain. The OECD also coordinated a global awareness campaign on online product safety in 2022, which was implemented in more than 10 jurisdictions. I think you're not on the right slide. If you could get back to slide 8, please. It's not the right slide. Slide 8, please. Yes, thank you. In October last year, the Working Party on Consumer Product Safety began a new project exploring the risks associated with the use of digital technologies in consumer products, physical risks, but also possible mental health risks that may be faced by consumers when, for example, artificial intelligence, Internet of Things, or immersive technologies such as virtual reality or augmented reality are incorporated in products, and you can see some examples on the slide. Preliminary results from the research so far, we have conducted a literature review and a survey of regulators, of businesses. We are actually conducting expert interviews as well. We have held a first workshop last year on the issue, and we are to hold a second workshop back-to-back with our official meeting in April next year. From the results from this research so far, we have seen that there is a need for more holistic and agile product safety policy frameworks, and perhaps a review of existing risk assessment and management methodologies to see whether they might not need to be adapted in the face of the digital risks that I just mentioned, and also in the face of the new green sustainable consumption risks. The project's final report with possible recommendations from the OECD in this new space will be finalized at the end of next year. Next slide, please. Another series of projects that we have developed and are finalizing now relate to ways to facilitate sustainable consumption, as I mentioned, and to notably assure that products that are being repaired, that are being refurbished, that are being reused, sold by consumers to other consumers as second-hand products, that these remain safe.
Brigitte, if you could please
Next
wrap it
slide,
up
please.
in the next minute or so, we would appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm nearly done. Thank you.
Thank
So
you.
next slide, please. One of these new issues related to sustainable consumption is to make sure that products that are meant to become more durable, more repairable, and recyclable are also safe. And actually, this is non-negotiable. Safety comes first. And so this work will basically look at, for example, how chemicals in products, chemicals that are not meant to be used in repaired products or in durable products, how to ensure that those chemicals or those products that are going to be made more durable remain safe. This is a new area of work that we are launching, which should be very interesting. Finally, I just wanted to mention that at the Ministerial, we launched a global awareness campaign on lithium-ion battery safety. And I'm very pleased to say that the Organization of American States has joined this initiative that is to run until the end of January next year. Lithium-ion batteries power many consumer products in our everyday lives, from phones, laptops, e-bikes, and e-scooters, but they also pose risks of overheating and explosion. And there's been a significant increase in incidents over the past years. So campaign participants will disseminate a set of OECD-agreed safety messages to consumers around the world and also to businesses via social and other media. Another key tool to strengthen international cooperation is our 2020 OECD recommendation on consumer product safety, which outlines the key elements of consumer product safety that should be in any policy framework. The recommendation is up for review, and we will publish a report on what has been done in countries to implement it, what key challenges remain at the end of 2026. And finally, I just wanted to conclude with a reminder that we at the OECD operate the OECD Global Recalls Portal, which brings together information on product recalls issues around the world. It has now been in place for more than 10 years and incorporates data from the ASEAN Product Alert System, the EU Safety Gate, and from the Inter-American Rapid Alert System of the OAS. It remains open for new jurisdictions to join and to foster international information sharing. Thank you again for the great collaboration so far, and looking forward to continuing it. Thank you.
Thank you, Brigitte. We appreciate it. We're honored to have your contribution remotely, so thank you so much. Para recuperar a los invitados presenciales que pueden haberse visto sorprendidos por una...
Surprised by a presentation in English. Just to recapitulate, the OECD recognizes sustainable challenges, and Brigitte is talking about a sample where 79% of the people were non-compliant when it comes to product safety and characteristics when it comes to safe design and sustainability. In fact, it was detected that 87% of the products that appeared somewhere or that were recalled, they were available for sale like 2 weeks later in the same portal. It's one of the most important challenges that we're facing. At the same time, we were looking to quantify the impact of green transition, speaking of materials like plant obsolescence, and also greenwashing, which is one of the main emphasis. And at the same time, they are advancing concretely in the in their agenda when it comes to consumer policies. The OECD is looking for different international voices. They met with 45 different countries, and the last thing she mentioned is that OECD recognizes the commitment of safe consumption networks and the OAS by joining this global campaign to guarantee the safety of lithium-ion batteries. So thank you so much, Brigitte, for sharing your insights with us. So we move on with the third presentation of this panel.
Mission and functions around product safety and intellectual property. This presentation will be given by Lorena Fernández Salamanca from the Brigade of Crimes on Intellectual Property. Lorena is an officer, is a police officer with 27 years of service, and currently she works at Brigade as a head of the group focused on the work of the strategic investigation in intellectual property and industrial property crimes. Big round of applause for her, please. Hello everyone, good afternoon. Thanks to SERNAC for having me. Continuing with the idea of the previous presentations, my name is Fernández, and I represent the Investigative Brigade of Crimes on Intellectual Property created on January 9 in 2008 with the need for controlling piracy and destroy criminal organization. Our brigade is located in the metropolitan region. In a national level, there are functions. That doesn't mean we don't have to move due to investigation matters, important ones, to national territory. Our mission is to investigate and clarify the crimes on intellectual and industrial properties. On the other hand, with a reference nationally and internationally. Retaking the mission, which is investigate and establish the crimes of intellectual and industrial property, we are referenced nationwide. It's a worldwide crime. It affects public health, affects economy. It's related to organized crime, is low risk and with high economic benefits. Our brigade and our present legislation is reflected in the law of intellectual industrial property law 21,000 on illegal trade and other norms to fight against this type of crimes. Besides, what different strategic alliances such as public services, government organization, and the private sector, we got the Chamber of Commerce and market representatives. As you can see on this slide, we also have our public organs related to crimes against intellectual property, among them the Prosecutor's Office, SERNAC, the Public Health Institute, INAPI, one more, which is Judiciary. As a brigade, several procedures stand out. Among that, cell phone seizures, clothing seizures, and important seizures of faked books in our country. It is important to point out and recognize that in 2023 our brigade was awarded in the 16th International Conference on Crimes on intellectual property by the National Service in Oslo, Norway, represented by our colleagues seated there, Commissioner Herrera. And it is important to point out that we do have international scope. Something very important, and as has been pointed out in other presentations, the pandemic has caused ravages worldwide, and we weren't out of that phenomenon. But in our case, Investigaciones Police of Chile, we had to reinvent or to do re-engineering in our investigation model. It means that trade was also affected. Therefore, our stakeholders, so interest subjects, organized crime, among others, they reformulate their way to sell their fake products, their goods, by using social networks, among them Instagram, Yapo, and other social media to offer their products illegally. It is so where other different methodology for working emerges in our brigade, which is broken out in 4 phases: diagnosis and planning, information review, verification of information, and working proposal. The implementation and development, task allocation, field work, and then collection of data, information collection, analysis, criminal analysis, obtain of evidence, and the elaboration of reports and requirement of measurements. It leads us to a proper procedure and seizure of evidence to certify the crime of intellectual property, which is the most important. With this type of model, this new one, 2 important operations emerged, such as was Caballeros de León, Lion Gentlemen, an investigation conducted in 2022 where the existence of 2 Peruvian criminal bands dedicated to the complete cycle of faking, from the elaboration of the clothing, embroidering, and introduction in the legal market. In this figure was firstly used the illicit association to exercise illegal trade. Also some measurements such as telephone taping or jamming and access to bank secret. It was done through the analysis of phone calls and social media, besides intelligence, police intelligence techniques such as tracking, for example, ending up in a sentence of the leaders and the seizure of their equity through their faked clothing. You can see on the screen the result of that seizure, and it has to do with the equity in this type of organizations, which is more than 200,000 clothing pieces, industrial machines, and cash. One more outstanding operation was the Operation G5 from 2023. It lasted a whole year, where we determined the existence of a Chilean band with a hierarchic and established organization, in addition to the commission of other associated crimes such as law of weapons and law 20,000. In this case, we were able to establish the crimes of illicit association, money laundering, illegal trade, the infraction to the Weapons Act, and drug and the law on drugs 20,000. There's a mistake there. It was more than 84,000 clothing pieces, 2 luxury cars and utility card in more than 50 million pesos. What's important here to understand and comprehend that in order to justify this model, this investigation model, intellectual property and industrial property crimes are a tool for organized crimes due to the money laundering. It should have a broader and deeper look, and therefore a different approach between the new challenges what has led us to reassess our investigative processes nationally. What are our main goals? To foster the articulation goals on criminal minds, to contribute to the disarticulation of cross-border organizations, and contribute for the legal process through a specialized investigation. What's relevant about it? First, to identify and analyze information, understand that this type of crimes, particularly illicit association, there is a pyramid structure where each of the members keep specific roles, positions, to see their subject of interest equity and understand that organized crime can be related to other high-impact crimes such as the law on drugs and weapons. And finally, I have to point out that due to this working model and the joint work with prosecutors' offices and those broader perspective on industrial and intellectual property crimes, we have been successful in these investigative processes. Thank you very much. Thank you very much to Mrs. Fernández for her presentation. Thank you very much. This would be the last presentation on this panel and the last one before lunch. The topic is about product safety. From product safety to service safety, a professional on technical studies on our sustainability unit on the National Service of the Consumer. He is a chemical engineering. He has developed his career in the academic area in formulation and management of research projects, development and innovation towards continuous improvement and sustainable development. Thank you very much.
Hello, good morning. First of all, I have a great challenge ahead of me beyond the presentation, to managing to raise your hopes and your enthusiasm, because we're all a little bit hungry. So the challenge will be to catch your attention in the following topic. As they already mentioned, my challenge is to show you a look towards the future, to change the perspective and incorporate service safety. To give you a little context in this perspective, we need to talk about e-commerce, which has been a recurrent theme during the entirety of these talks that we've been having. For this, we need to look at some data starting from 2017 at the worldwide level. 8% of total commerce belong to e-commerce, and by 2023 that number has increased to 20%. It was more than double in just 7 years. This has to do with behavioral changes because of the pandemic, of course, but we want to understand that e-commerce during 2016 was 1 out of 2 purchases that were done using mobile devices. By 2023, that share increased to 3 out of 4 purchases, 73%. So it's important to integrate these concepts and understand that the usage of mobile devices, in particular you yourself, you can see it right now, has increased the presence in commerce dynamics. Now, the answer of the industry, because of this interoperativity vision and the always-on philosophy, has pushed companies to change their traditional trade dynamics. It's no longer the classic models of business to business or business to consumer, but it's more directed towards products and services. In particular, there's an example that is very easy to notice, which is what happened with Microsoft in particular and Microsoft Office specifically. As we're all familiar with it, we all know Word and PowerPoint. At first was, physical disks that you installed on your computer, and then it started evolving into digital installations where you could access through online shopping. You could download the executable to install the software. And now, pushed by competitors such as Google, with the Google Suite and Workspace, Google Docs, Google Forms, this service eventually became an online service. And these platforms now are directly online. On the other hand, speaking of e-commerce, it also increased the offers of tangible services. And in that sense, we look at services like aesthetic centers who answer to this mutation in demand, because it's no longer the product being consumed, which could be a skin care product or a general product. You also consume an experience. And this is where the companies look to satisfy these new consumer needs. So what can we do? What can we see when we want to integrate and evolve this concept? Is that on the one hand, product safety is particularly directed to the physical product. The design characteristics and regulations respond to technical regulations that answer to customer satisfaction. On the other hand, the responsibility usually befalls on the manufacturer. But when we look at safety on services, that we're looking at a more ambitious spectrum that is linked to the consumer experience. It's not only the product, it's how did they buy it, why did they buy it, how did they get to the point where they're buying it. Now it's no longer the manufacturer that is responsible, it can also be the distributor, it can be the way it was acquired. In that sense, there's a bit of an influence of what happens with personal data, because personal data can respond to a flaw that can be present in people. They can be exploited. It can be a limitation in the usage of a certain product that could be unsafe for them. Maybe the product itself is not unsafe, but the people that, for example, the people that are celiac, they can't consume an element that may have gluten traces. But that is necessary information that needs to be provided and visible. On the other hand, when it comes to hyperconnectivity, we also look for availability and permanent continuity of these services due to the growing demand by consumers. And in that sense, achieving that, we can increase trust, user trust. How do we integrate these concepts? Is that we're always thinking in user safety by looking towards the characteristics and them being safe, or how the purchasing process is developed. And that way, you can notice that there needs to be a line of thinking focused holistically on risk, more of a wide-ranging perspective, not just punctual matters, but we also need to push the boundaries and in that way look for continuous improvement. Now, why is it relevant? All this spectrum, why is it relevant? It's because among the guarantees that need to exist for the consumer, there are also the rights of the consumer, where we focus on the safety. And there's also the duties of the provider and their duty to inform to the consumer. So when we're looking to change these dynamics, this all needs to be integrated a little bit more depending on what we're pretending to do. I now leave you here with the challenges of this interlocking of different perspectives. The legal frameworks needs to adapt. Unfortunately, we can take actions, but there's a lot of gray areas in between. When you are focused so much on the physical product, you can solve a product's problems or issues, but you can't completely mitigate risk if it's misused. In that sense, I want to retake the aesthetic centers issue that I raised earlier. It's a cosmetic product that can maybe fulfill all the indications and comply with the sectorial requirements, but if it's used by people that do not have the technical conditions or the preparation or knowledge or response capacity in their environment, or where it's being applied, the health conditions, the sanitary conditions do not exist, it can create a problem regardless. So this is where we need to open the opportunity to thinking further ahead from a legal perspective, and the more open we can be, the more spaces can be available for the execution of all of our counterparts. On the other hand, strengthening trust in e-commerce. That is important because there are many gaps information gaps between what you physically buy and what you buy digitally through the digital market. While it's true that right now e-commerce is 20% and it continues growing, physical commerce is still 80%. So this is where it's also important to create this intersectionality of information. This is also important to train professionals. When you go to a place and buy something, you trust that the person you're asking questions about a product, the salesman or the technician, handles information properly. If I'm going to buy a mattress because I have a back condition, I trust that the person selling me the mattress is going to recommend the most adequate product and is not going to end up making things worse, which is something that can happen. And who do this consumer goes to? They goes to where they purchased it. They don't go to the manufacturer. So that's why it's important to integrate throughout the supply chain of the purchase process chain. We need to involve the providers, the consumers, the manufacturers, because a well-informed consumer has a more complete purchasing process, and that reduces risk. So finally, I want to leave you as a reflection that is clear that it's important to work together. When it comes to safety matters, that matters to all of us, and it's important to integrate all the government entities, especially the auditing entities, all the companies with their associated guilds, and the consumers with their consumer watchdog organizations, to safeguard consumer safety at every level, because digital environments, and of course now with the breach of AI, this is being accelerated, and they respond more rapidly to stimuli than how the law can advance. So it's need to pace ourselves. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Jaime. So now just to recapitulate what we saw in this panel, in the latter half of this panel, the earlier half of this panel of the consumer safety, Subprefect Fernández told us about the physical, the things that happen with boots on the ground, the restless efforts of the police in Chile, and I imagine that also happens in all the countries to dismantle all these gangs and organized crime that push counterfeit goods. She expressed that the most important thing is the patrimonial affectation. These gangs they don't care if their bottom line is not affected. Javiera told us about the digital responsibility. There's virtual matters, the social media, and the commitment that must be upheld when it comes to consumption. And Jaime made this link between what was virtual and physical in markets, integrated markets, the way in which we can work jointly through different services, both in Chile and in the countries of the network. And Brigitte from France told us what have been the advancement and interest of the OECD and where we should emphasize our efforts. What are the concerns at an international level, and how organizations and international, such as the OAS network, can determine a trajectory that can guarantee safety for consumers worldwide. So thank you so much for your attention, for your presentations, being part of this very intense early day. So now you're all free to have lunch. Thank you so much. Hour for lunch. Please be back at 2:30 for the last leg of these talks. Thank you.